How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to the North Carolina Cryptid and Paranormal Project. I'm glad to be back. Hope you're all glad that we're doing this again after a month break. So Happy New Year, everyone. Hope you all had a good Christmas. It's glad to see you again, and it's glad to be back. It's been a long time waiting, but it was needed. So, hey, everybody in the chat, Steve, Al, Nana, be kind, howdy. We have a good guest tonight. We have Mary A. Joyce, and I'm going to bring her on right now, and we're going to talk about the Cherokee Little People of North Carolina.
Hi there, Tom. How you doing?
Hey, Mary, how are you?
Real good, thanks.
Well, it's good to have you on tonight. I saw one of your symposiums, and I was very interested in what you were discussing, and I was just saying I had to have you on. And with the kind likes of Mr. Mark Eddy, that's in the chat as well. Thank you, Mark. He was able to connect us and get you on and discuss the. A lot of people don't really talk about this. It's mainly Bigfoot, cryptids, dogman, UFOs, but not many people discuss the little Cherokee people of North Carolina or all over the country, really.
You're right. And where I'm located in the mountains of Western North Carolina, we do have the little people, and we also have Bigfoot. So it's quite a place for you to explore.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I got them in. I mean, the property where I'm at in Charlotte, they're all over because I have, probably about 50 to 100 acres of natural wildlife territory back there, and then it kind of butts up to a greenway trail with a long stream creek around it that goes for another like 20 miles. So it's perfect habitat. Lots of wildlife. They got the water, they got the fish, whatever they need, and I got the proof that they're back there. I got all kinds of structures going on and all kinds of cool things. So
Fantastic.
pretty
But
wild.
but the little people is something you really haven't apparently covered as much, right?
Not so much. No, my one friend Laura Greenleaf discussed them a little bit from Oklahoma, but I think she lived in Texas at the time. You can chime in, Laura, in the chat where you had the experience with the little people because she is part Cherokee and it's in her heritage, and she had experiences with them when she was younger. So
I actually had never heard of the Cherokee Little People until I moved to North Carolina. And at first, I just kind of dismissed the things I was hearing as just, like campfire stories. And then one day, an elderly man who was well respected, or he's now passed away, but he was well respected in this area, was a World War II hero. He was a pastor for over 40 years. And he came into where I was working, and we had talked before, but he started talking about the little people, and he said, no, they are real. And as a young man after World War II, he had been involved with construction projects at Western Carolina University, which is in Cullowhee, North Carolina, in the mountains. And when they were digging the foundations for new buildings on the campus, they kept running into these little tunnels.
Mhm.
And they were everywhere. And these tunnels were all built in very dense red clay. They were all square cut with an arched ceiling or top, which makes them stronger. And they were just everywhere. And then the people who ran the bulldozers and started digging things up, they found little skeletons. And one of the professors kept a skull on the desk in his office, I think mostly as a conversation starter. And he said it was a child skull from the Indian mound.
Mhm.
Well, the child skull had all its wisdom teeth, so it wasn't a child. And
Wow,
that's
that's
that
definitely
started.
yeah, that's a good way to kind of tell that it wasn't a child because it had its wisdom teeth.
Right. I think you
Oh,
have to
yeah.
be at least 18 to start hatching those.
I
So
think 18, yeah, so I think it's like 17 to 20 now, I think so. But yeah, that's a good way to kind of phase out that it wasn't a child skull. So when I heard that information, that data, I was blown away. I was like, yeah, there's no way those are children's skulls. So yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry, but
no, that's all right.
very interesting stuff.
And it's interesting who discovers these things. This professor at the college had this on his desk. He was not the one that figured this out. There was an English teacher at the high school level who, for some reason, was in his office and saw it, and she picked it up. And she's the one that made the observation it had wisdom teeth, therefore, it couldn't be a child. So sometimes this information is discovered in ways you don't expect.
Oh, absolutely. That's pretty wild. And you had someone else when they were, I think, when they were doing construction, they kept finding a bunch of tunnels that were eventually they started filling them with concrete because they didn't want to dig them out, right?
Well, that was only one that they did that to. They were digging behind the stadium at Western Carolina University, and this hole opened up, and they kept truckloads of cement to pour in there, and I think it took forever to fill it in. So clearly, it was one of these tunnels, which indeed had been found all over the campus. And in my book, I have maps for location purposes, and it has always been my hope that people who have some really good credentials could use this book as a guidepost where they might be able to find more things. Surprisingly, you do not get support for this from the university. They were more concerned about building buildings than they were about preserving some really unique history. And here's a little bit of irony. The anthropology department is in the basement of, or in the lowest level of a building that's been there for, since the early days. It's called the McKee Building. And on the other side of the supporting wall is where three of these tunnels open up. And so here's the anthropology department, and then there's this permanent wall that's been installed. I think around 19, about 2000, and those tunnels are still there. If they had been really smart, they would have at least put a window in there so that
Mm.
people could see these tunnels, and it could have been the basis for a really, really good archaeology program. As far as I know, they only have an anthropology program, and
Hmm.
but they went to great lengths to keep this from being discovered. There was a man who contacted me who was a mature man who had been a student there, and when he was a student, he and some of his buddies were down by the creek or the river, and the head of security, who was a man I happened to meet several times, was walking with a box that looked a little bit bigger than a shoebox. And he got into it. The kids asked him about it, and they got into a conversation. And he revealed that he had a box of these little bones from the little Cherokee, and he was taking them and to bury them on an RV trail, um, so they could continue their building without being interrupted. So that's the kind of obstacle there
Hmm.
has been to a really, really great archaeology subject.
So it seems like they were trying to do some covering up to kind of keep things at bay and keep people from finding more about. Now, there's a question from Blondes and Booze podcast. They want to know, would the little people be considered a type of elemental or a cryptid?
We need to get into the term little people is used in many, many ways.
Mhm.
The Cherokee Little People typically are 3 to 3.5 feet tall. They indeed look a lot like the Cherokee people, though from everything I have pieced together, the Cherokee Little People were here before the Cherokee. The Cherokee originated in the Great Lakes in I don't know how long ago, and they migrated here to the mountains. And so the Little People were here first. And there's some very puzzling remnants, um, many of them. One of them is there is a petroglyph. It's the largest one, I think, on the eastern part of the Mississippi, and it's called the Judiculla Rock. That's the Americanized way of saying it. I cannot pronounce it
Yeah,
correctly.
Judicola.
I cannot pronounce it right when they give it the pronunciation. I just can't do it. But anyhow, it's known as Judiculla, and I'm going to have to go back and measure that. It seems like it's about 15 feet across and about 10 feet the other direction. And it's at an angle. So it's almost like an easel. And it is covered with carvings and markings. The Cherokee do not know what those markings mean. So that indicates that, somebody besides the Cherokee did them. With that said, I have heard one Cherokee boldly say that he can explain it all, but he seems to be in the minority.
Dang. Real quick, Woods and Creek. No, this is an interview podcast. If you want to chime into the Facebook group, we have a group on Facebook called North Carolina Cryptids Paranormal Project. Just do a member request there, and we'll get you on. We kind of get your information that way. or you can message me on Facebook for Thomas Cardos. But sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, if you have an encounter, that'd be awesome to hear about it. That's pretty wild. Steve wants to know if they found markings or writings on any walls at the university. I suppose.
The only thing I know about is that one man who was involved with construction, probably about 5 miles from the university, he said that he found these scrape marks, like a tool had been used to um, make the walls even and straight.
Oh wow.
I've never heard about writings in the tunnels at all. And again, they are made out of red clay, real dense red clay. And all I know about are the street marks. Um, there's a lot of really interesting things. Let me give you another one. Back in 1940, there was what they call a historic flood here in this area, and it's the Tuckasegee River. It overflowed, and the pictures of it, it was a terrible flood. And there was this one little 5-year-old boy who found this, what he called a lead head. And it's got a face sort of like a leprechaun on it. And it had been washed away from very, very deep soil, which indicates it was very old. And it's found in the same areas where we have the little people. And like I said, it doesn't look like the Cherokee Little People. It looks like a leprechaun. And in my book about this, Cherokee Little People Were Real, I have a picture of that. And next to it, I have a conventional illustration of a leprechaun. And you can see how similar they are.
Oh wow.
The man called it his lead head because it was made out of a very heavy metal. It had been poured because there was a seam all around the edges of it. Um, and that washed up from deep down in the ground, and so it
Now,
had been
do
there
you
very
think
ancient times.
do you think any of that would be considered like puckwudgie? You know, have you heard of what puckwudgies are? Kind of like little leprechaun-like individuals.
All I can say is that face looks like a leprechaun.
Yeah.
What you want to call it, I don't know, but to me, it looks like a leprechaun. And one of the things I learned from the old timers that I interviewed was that there was more than one kind of little person or people in this area. One looked like the Cherokee people, and the other ones, the Cherokee didn't like them, and they would kill them.
Hmm.
And this may be, they had red whiskers, they did say that. And
Oh,
they may be the ones that look like the leprechauns.
wow. You said red whiskers.
Uh huh. And I met several moonshiners. They aren't moonshiners now, or they weren't moonshiners when I
Hmm.
met them, but back in the 30s, they were in the moonshine business. And one of them, who was really close to 90 at the time, he and his wife took me on an old trail up at the top of Cowie Mount, no, Cullowhee Mountain. And they were going to show me where they had found a pile of little people bones. That's a quote, a pile of little people bones. And they had discovered those when they were doing or building their moonshine still. And they quickly covered them up because they didn't want to have any attention drawn to their illegal activities.
Yeah, they gotta keep that. You know what they're doing in the woods. They don't want the feds to catch them while they're making their moonshine. That's a big thing in North Carolina because I've done work at some of the ABC stores, and they have the ATF and the ABC, officers working there, and they're always talking about trying to catch like people moonshining in the woods. So that's a big thing in North Carolina, people believe it or not.
It certainly was back in the 30s. That was the only way some of these back in the woods
Yeah,
mountain
in the
people survived.
mountains, because people don't realize people up in the top tip of the mountains between like the Tennessee border. I mean, that area is really poor.
Yeah.
Not a lot of jobs, not a lot of money coming in, and people got to resort to what's in the heritage, so they make the moonshine.
So they can survive. Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
nothing wrong with that.
All because somebody wants taxes from them. That's it.
I was just gonna say all because it's not getting taxed, so that's why it's illegal because it's non-taxable,
Right.
spirit.
Right.
Wow.
So anyhow, I ended up interviewing a whole bunch of old timers, and they all told me different stories. One of the guys, by the way, I would meet with them on Saturdays around their kitchen tables, and I think I did a total of 11 or 12 of them for the book that I did. And one of the guys, that his story is popping into my mind right now, and he would walk across this field, which is now part of the campus of Western Carolina University. And he loved to stop and talk to the farmer who used a plow that was pulled by a horse. So he loved horses. He would stop and talk to him about the horse and or horses. And the farmer was always concerned that one of these tunnels would open up and his horse would break a leg. Um, Another thing that was kind of interesting is they talked about an Indian mound on the campus. And the old timers said it wasn't a regular Indian mound. When they were boys and they were playing in that area, this old Indian mound had a hole in the middle of it, like a tubular hole that went straight down into the ground. And the farmer would put these big logs down into this hole to keep the cattle from falling into it. The old timers said this was a pile of dirt from the digging of these tunnels because many of these tunnels ended up where this supposed Indian mound was. And I thought
Wow.
it was an interesting little twist, too.
That is. That's big. That's serious. That's pretty wild.
Yeah. And another, oh, is that a question up there for somebody?
Oh no, that was for OK Nana about their people smaller. That's good. That's fine. Now you can
Oh
keep
no,
going.
I can add some. I can add some stuff to that
Yeah.
to show you the contrast. Again, the Cherokee Little People are about 3.5 feet tall. Um, there is a mummy that was found out in Wyoming by gold miners back in 1932, and this little mummy was only 14 inches tall.
Oh
And
wow.
it's been analyzed by the American Museum of Natural History and by Harvard University's anthropology department. So it's a legitimate little mummy. And it was in like a yoga position with its arms crossed, but it had been beaten to death. It had been beaten so badly that the brain showed. And I think the back was hurt and the neck was hurt. Um,
Wow.
Obviously somebody just raged and killed it, but that's a total different size. That's 14 inches. So that's the Cherokee Little People would be giants compared to those. So this title of Little People covers a lot of territory.
That's pretty wild. That kind of reminds me of that old, if you remember, I don't know what documentary it was, but they showed like a little, like 12 to 14 inch little UFO. Well, they said it was a UFO mummy, and it's like the head was smashed in, and it was like a whitish kind of gray color, and they were like doing testing on it, but I forget if they couldn't kind of deem what from the DNA what was drawn from it. They couldn't really put to what species it came from because there was no known species, which is wild.
By the way, when I titled this my book, it's called Cherokee Little People Were Real. After the book came out, a lot of people opened up with me that wouldn't have opened up except they knew I was not going to laugh at the subject.
Right.
And at the time I wrote the book, I thought the Cherokee Little People were just something of the past. And I've met a lot of people now who have, um, had face to face contact with little people.
Mhm.
And a bunch of years after I did this initial research for the book, I was contacted by friends that live on another mountain ridge, about two mountain ridges over from where I am. And they live at the top, and it's a gravel road, like single lane road to get up there. And they have a um, game cam set up by their entranceway. And a bird triggered it. And in the background, there's this, what we believe to be a little person. Well, the two of them, the husband and wife, they debated with each other about whether they should share it with me. And
Mhm.
they were debating about what was it? Was it
Mhm.
a spirit? Was it a real Cherokee little person? And so they finally decided to share it with me, and I analyzed it. And first of all, it was in August when it was hot, and this little person seems to be almost totally nude. You see them from the back, or see it from the back,
Wow.
has the long straight black hair from
Mhm.
the back. And the way that I found out if it was real or not was I turned up the contrast on my computer. And if you turn the contrast way up, anything that is alive goes to a magenta color. So
Okay.
I did that, it went to magenta. But I also did the same thing with verified ghost
Mhm.
pictures. Turned it up, the ghost would not turn magenta. They stayed the white color.
Oh wow.
There was one ghost picture where a ghost was playing with a small child who was alive on the floor of a living room. The child went to magenta, the ghost stayed white. So this little creature had to have been very much alive and not a spirit. And the couple also measured it against, at a later time, measured it against a tree. And it was in that same category of about 3.5 feet tall.
Wow. That's pretty wild. That's pretty wild. I mean, 3.5 feet tall, pretty to be going right now. Steve has a question about the loggers or coal miners. Talk about them. If any of those people talked about them.
I've talked to not coal miners, but one of the old timers that I talked with, his dad had been, the foreman, I guess, of a mica mine here in the mountains.
Hmm.
And when this man was about 7 years old, maybe, the workers of the mine came back to his dad's house or to their house all excited because when they were digging a new tunnel, they crossed one at a 45 at a 90-degree angle, and there was an ancient tunnel beneath that, and they knew about the stories of the little people, and they were really excited about it. um, so that's one of the earliest stories where that one of the earliest stories that I was able to get.
Now you did a lot of like deathbed confessions with people that were like that wouldn't people that held this in that had encounters or seen them for years and back in like the 30s almost, and they pretty much told you on their deathbed, didn't they? Didn't you have accounts of that?
I don't think I had any deathbed uh, confessions, but all of these old timers were in their 80s and 90s.
Right.
So they were all elderly. And I did not intend to write the book. When I found out that nobody had recorded this information that I was learning from these men, I decided to turn it into a book. Originally, it was a very just cut and dried interviews, but I began to do a lot more research, and it eventually became the book.
Wow, that's wild. So you're pretty much going around town or wherever you can go, people meeting with people and just charting their whether whatever they had encounter, sighting, what they seen or they came across
Well,
bones.
it happened two ways. One, the original gentleman that I told you about, that was the World War II hero, he connected me with these other old timers. They never would have invited me into their home. They never would have, welcomed me if I knocked on their door and wanted to talk to them. He opened the door for me. So you kind of need connections sometimes, especially if you're working with the Cherokee. They're not going to just open up with some white woman who has a big curiosity.
Yeah, well, that too, and mainly locals too, because locals don't like to they don't like to talk about things like anything that's strange or things that go bump in the night or anything. They'll keep it to themselves. So
Well,
when
the
you,
Cherokee, especially because the white people laughed at them for so long about it.
hmm,
But
yep,
that's changed.
exactly.
That's changing.
Now, were they peaceful people, the little people?
I only hear I hear interesting stories, and these continue to go on today. There are some of the Indians who are certainly open to the little people, and the little people become like, I don't know, extended family almost.
Hmm.
But the little people um, will throw rocks on or pebbles on the roof of some people's homes for the simple reason that the people often put out food for them. So if they've forgotten to put the food out for them, they'll start throwing the pebbles um, on the roof to remind them, "Hey, we're here. We'd like some more food."
That also sounds like people who habituate the Sasquatch. You don't feed them. If you're feeding them every week or every other couple days, and then you stop feeding them, they'll start banging your house or hitting your house or throwing rocks at your house. So it's kind of like the same scenario, which is wild.
Well, it's like training in any kind of pet. They get used to being fed at a certain time,
Hmm.
and they want you to feed them. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like your dogs. You feed them every day, every morning or night, and then you don't put their food out. They're like wondering where their food is. So
right.
it's
But
crazy.
I don't want to put the little people in the category of an animal because they
Right,
are very, very human.
right.
And many of the Native Americans revered the little people and turned to them for wisdom. And I don't know if I can dig up the details on this in the back of my mind, but there was, I believe, a Crow chief I've written about him a long time ago, and he was the most famous chief in his tribe, whatever that was. And he would go up to, I think they called it their medicine mountain, and he would consult with a little person or little people, I don't know which. And this man followed the advice, and he became the most revered um,
Hmm.
chief of his tribe.
Wow. What was I going to say about the? Didn't you do any kind of or hearing about any of the moon people too? The moon-eyed people.
The Moon Eye people are the same people. And what happened was when the Cherokee first came to North Carolina, they would find these neatly tended gardens, but they
Hmm.
didn't see any people around. Eventually, they saw these little people come out from underneath the ground at night when the moon was out, and they called them the Moon people or the Moon Eyed people
So
because of
obviously, the gardens were probably smaller than the basic garden they were used to seeing if they were from the little people, right?
that would be my guess, unless
Yeah.
they did a huge community garden. Who knows?
Right.
But that's the origin of the Moon Eye people. It's not like
Okay.
a lot of people think that they must be referring to ETs with big
Aliens.
eyes,
Yeah.
and that's not it.
Okay. Can you see this question on the screen?
My screen just disappeared.
Okay. It says
I can
what
hear
language? What?
I can hear you, but I cannot see you at all.
All right. It says what language do they speak?
You're back. I don't know.
It must have been some kind of ancient dialect of Cherokee if they were Cherokee Little People. I'm assuming.
Well, it may have been totally separate because, again, the little people were here first. The
Yeah, that's right.
Cherokees came later, so they may very well have had their own language since then because they live fairly close to the Cherokee. There probably is a mutual language that they share now, but in the beginning, they would not have been the same.
Yunwi Junsti. How you say their name? Okay. Thank you, Nana. Cool. Very
That's
cool.
I recognize the spelling.
Yeah.
Like I said, I trip all over my tongue when I try to say things that don't look quite like I'm used to.
Absolutely. Now, you did some other studies in the mountains of North Carolina with underground things you came across or you've heard about, right? If you want to go into that, because I have some things to go add to it as well. So I'm interested to hear about that.
Before we do that, can I jump back? Because I'd like to tie the Bigfoot together with
Yes,
some of
tie it
this.
up. Yes, I'm
Is that
sorry.
okay?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I mentioned earlier about this petroglyph called the Judiculla rock.
Hmm.
Many people, including myself, think that the Judiculla giant was a Bigfoot.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons that I think that is because they talk about it bounding over the mountains. And I have interviewed, I think, at least 5 people in that immediate area or up the mountain from Judiculla Rock who have seen the Bigfoot. And I think that that rock ties these little people together with the Bigfoot because they both are in the same area. And that's not the only place. So I just wanted to throw that in there before
Oh,
we went on
wow,
to anything else.
that's pretty wild. Yeah. Well, would you rather do the UFOs or do the
Well,
underground
we can
stuff?
do underground. Again, it's all in the same area. I When I moved here, I had no idea I was moving to such a hot spot. And
Hmm.
we have the Bigfoot, we have the little people, we have the underground bases, we have the UFOs. They have found the skeletons of giants with 6 toes on each foot. Um, so it's a hot spot for interesting activity. And the closest underground facility to um, Western Carolina University is something that locally is known as PARI, PARI. It stands for the Pisgah Astronomical Research Institute. That was formerly a Department of Defense facility back during the days of the Cold War. And I was able to, it was a long story. Let me see if I can condense it. There's a woman who had grown up on a secret facility. Her father was in, really top secret work. And everybody who lived in this facility or the area was under pressure to keep their mouth shut and not talk about stuff. They got into trouble if they did. And she and her husband used to come into where I would work. They knew about my website and they knew about my interest in UFOs, and they would start conversations with me. And they were real kind of shy. And each time they would come in and eventually start this conversation about UFOs. And I said, well, how about if I interview you? So I ended up going to their camper trailer to interview them about UFOs. That was not the reason they wanted me to come and talk to them.
Oh, wow.
Because of her experience uh, growing up in a secret facility, she knew about this facility beneath the Perry facility, and she wanted to tell me about it because I apparently had passed her sniff test, and she said that it's a secret facility. It at that time was 6 stories deep, city size, totally self sufficient, and she talked about them doing mind experiments on people there, and um, I got an interesting confirmation of that at another time. A man who, as a young man, had worked at a tree farm near that facility um, told me about people working at the tree farm who had seen caged animals being carried into this facility. And this was before it was turned into an astronomical institute.
Right.
What were they doing bringing caged animals into that
Hmm.
facility? And when she told me about experimentation going on there, and then I see this, I go, yeah, that kind of gives confirmation to it.
Yeah. Put
Plus,
two and two.
thanks to Google, I found other confirmation. I got a call sometime after this, and a man who lives in the area told me there was underground explosions going on. There was new activity in that area, and I used Google and I started looking at it, and I could see the excavation equipment, and I could see this big hole that was covered over, mostly covered over by 2 giant tarps, and so the dirt was coming out of there, and then they were spreading it over the hills so it wouldn't become a pile.
Yep.
And so there has been, in rather recent years, new expansion going on at that facility.
That's pretty interesting because I have a that's near, well, Perry is Pisgah, well, Pisgah National Forest, which is by Asheville, I believe, that near Asheville, North Carolina.
The Pisgah
And
Forest is all
yeah,
over the place.
well,
So
but it's also located near Brown Mountain, and Brown Mountain is associated with the Brown Mountain Lights. That's
correct.
like a local phenomena. People think it's ghosts, spirits, UFOs, whatever. But I have a friend another podcaster. Her name's Jessica Jones, a cryptid huntress. She actually did a remote viewing session, and the data she collected from Brown Mountain Lights is, she said her dad had brought a underground facility, kind of doing like Tesla kind of experiments. And I was actually in that area many years ago when I first moved down here, doing like a delivery in a delivery truck with, I think they were cabinets, and me and the person I was with, we were driving in circles continuously for like 30 minutes, just driving it because our GPS kept spazzing out, and that whole area, and that more like what I've done research is like a hot spot for just like losing phone signal. Just the everything about it is just the gravitational pull on it is off. It's something about that area. The energy is it's just wild. So yeah, we got lost there for like almost an hour trying to get out. We just kept going in circles. So luckily we got out of there. But there's high strangeness in that area. But I just figured I'd bring it to the attention that, with the underground stuff, that Perry and associated with my friend that does remote viewing is pretty wild. And then me getting stuck out there on the mountain. So yeah,
You're giving me multiple thoughts.
ties it
Um,
all together.
on a couple of times, I have gone out to Perry, and always with other people in the car. And the closer you get to it, your head begins to feel weird, and you go, "I don't want to be here." It's like it. I call it people repellent. It makes you just want to get far away.
Well, the
And
frequency.
everybody in the car experienced it. Now, whether it's actually used as a, I don't know, like a way of repelling people to keep them away, or whether it's an activity that's going on that generates a funny energy, I can't say with any certainty. I just know that the feeling is very real. And that's not the only places. I've heard it about Linville. Um, and also, another person who has military background went up to the facility that is built beneath the Smoky Mountain National Park. As far as I know, that is the most recently built one in Western North Carolina.
Hmm.
And the closer she got to it, she began to notice that there were no longer any birds singing.
Oh
And
wow.
the closer she got, she began to get this bad feeling
Mhm.
in her head. It got to the point where she almost felt nauseous, and it didn't go away. That feeling didn't go away until she started going back down the mountain.
Yeah, that's that all about that frequency. Like you said, they use frequency as a propellant to repellent to keep people away or to mess with your head, and you don't want to be involved in it because it resonates in your head a certain way that doesn't feel good. It's not comfortable.
Right. But there's been lots of evidence of construction going on there. Um, they tend to do their work at night when most people aren't up and around to hear things. Um,
Mm.
One person described it as it sounded like they were driving pylons into the ground. Of
Mm.
course, it's all underground, but it had that. You've seen when they're making bridges
Yeah.
and they're putting the pylons in like that.
Oh yeah.
It sounded like that. Another man who was a retired sheriff from Florida, he went to Devil's Devil's Rock, which is near Perry,
Mm.
and he had a Corvette. He loved to drive at night in his Corvette convertible, and he stopped. And when he stopped, he was feeling something, and he went and put his ear up against one of the rocks that's near the parking area, and he could hear mechanical sounds coming from beneath the ground.
Oh wow. That's amazing, and people don't realize the underground. What they do underground is like if you can kind of put two and two together. There's been a lot of earthquakes lately in like South Carolina region, and a lot of those earthquakes are kind of attributed to like the building of these underground fortresses because they need an earthquake to kind of rumble that area to break up the ground underneath. But earthquake's the only way to kind of do it. It's like a man-made generated earthquake, and there's been a lot of them throughout the whole country, left and right, 6.2s and this and that. It's all they put it kind of attributed to underground facilities that are doing that.
It certainly could be the reason for some of it, for certain.
I
Um,
wouldn't say all of them, but I would say a good amount. In certain states, especially when they're so repetitious.
right. But a lot of the tunneling is done with these machines that don't, where they don't have to use dynamite, and it's like they melt their way through the stone,
Hmm.
and they do like seven. The last I heard was like 7 miles in a day, and
Yeah.
some of the people who have lived above where this tunneling has been going on, um, they will experience that sound and that vibration only for a certain amount of time, and
Hmm.
then it stops simply because that tunneling device has moved on.
Yeah, well, that the technology, like I said, that was back like when Phil Schneider was still alive, talking
That's
about what they did in Dulce, New Mexico. They were doing miles, so many miles a day with those. It was said it would like melt it into like almost like a like coral.
right. It makes it real smooth.
Yeah,
It kind of encases it, so it's really a good way to make a tunnel.
absolutely. Well, that was pretty interesting. Talking about some underground stuff. Let's see, we're at 38 minutes. What do you want to go into? UFOs?
Let me think here a second here. Tell me what you're the most interested in.
I mean, Bigfoot, UFOs.
I
All
mean, I
that.
got some Bigfoot stories that are probably ones you probably have not heard before.
I'd love
Um,
to hear them.
One of them was a man who lived not too far from this Judiculla Rock, and he had to retire early from the sheriff's department someplace in Florida because he had cancer, and so he became a real fanatic about raising his own garden and eating real well, all for health reasons. And he was like up on a hill, and then he looked down on an old logging road, and one night he's out on his porch, and he sees Bigfoot going across the logging road, and he noticed that every time it was first the it was the female, and then it was the two children, and then it was the male that would go across. I think that's the order they went in, but they always went in the same order. Now, what made this interesting was that the male Bigfoot became open to interact with this man who used to be a sheriff. And the Bigfoot would come down when the man was doing his gardening, and they communicated telepathically, and the man also shared food from his garden with the Bigfoot. So,
Wow.
as you know, people can interact with the Bigfoot in some very human-like ways. And the book I wrote about that is called Bigfoot Beyond the Footprints. It focuses on the human side of Bigfoot. It's easy to find stories about them being, turning them into monsters,
Mhm.
but they have family and they interact as humans in many many ways. Um, One great story is a little boy was lost uh, when he was with his family camping. He just wandered off at night when everybody else was at the campground, and he got to the point where he was so lost he sat down and he's crying, and all of a sudden this female Bigfoot comes out of the bushes and grabs him by the hand and walks and drags him back so he would be close to where his family was. And uh, there's fascinating stories about Bigfoot helping people. We
Mhm.
had a story which you may have heard about because it was here in North Carolina a couple of years ago. There was a little uh, like 2.5, 3-year-old boy that
Yep.
was
I
you,
remember.
uh, I don't know if I can think of his name right now, but it
I don't know. Him.
made the national news.
Mhm.
It was January or in the wintertime. He was gone for 3 days and 2 nights. Um, and when they finally found him, um, he said that he started talking about this big bear that befriended
Mhm.
him. Well,
Bear Man.
that's the best a little boy can do.
Mhm.
He certainly wouldn't have the word Bigfoot in his
Nope.
vocabulary. And when I wrote about that for the website, I did a lot of research, and there had been a lot of Bigfoot sightings in all those counties adjacent to that area. So, in my own
That's
mind, that was a Bigfoot saving a little boy
yeah.
or
That's
trying to comfort.
definitely Bigfoot saved that boy because I mean any kind of toddler that young exposed in the elements outside, up north in the mountains. I mean, it's like negative, 2 to 20 degrees out overnight. Any kind of normal person would die overnight in that kind of extreme conditions. And this boy survived 3 days. I mean, he was what 2, 3 years old,
Right,
and
and he wasn't dressed
that's
that.
what kept him warm in his I guess with his fur, his
Yeah. So, but it's interesting. There's a lot of stories, and they go back a long time ago. There's a story, and I had to check this out many different ways to make sure it was credible. And during the Civil War, there was a battle going on, and this man was severely injured, and he was sure he was going to die. And he looked up, and there were legs that were like tree trunks,
Mm-hmm.
and he was eventually saved by a group of Bigfoot. They dragged him back to this underground cave, which was more like a dirt cave, because when he was recuperating, he would hold on to the roots of from the ceiling of the cave to hold himself up to walk. But they nursed him back to health, and the female Bigfoot would take some kind of a root or something or leaves and chew on it and then put it on the wound. When his part of the cave got really stinky because, well, you can imagine, the Bigfoot came back with some white powder and spread it all over the area. And whatever that was something that overtook the smell of bathroom smells, is basically what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
Uh, and when he got well enough to walk, they took him out and they pointed him in the direction to go back to where his people were. And it makes a good story, and it's in the book told in much better fashion than my abbreviated form.
I'd like to get a hold of one of your books. Well, if anyone wants one of you, if you want to just give a quick plug about if any of your books, how they can get them, I'm sure people would be interested in the audience. If you want to do that real quick.
Okay, the website that I do is called skyshipsovercashers.com. The only word that's difficult to spell is cashiers. It's spelled like a cashier at the grocery store. Skyshipsovercashers.com. And if you go to Editor's Corner, I have brief descriptions of each of my books, and there's 5 of them that are in print right now. One is Cherokee Little People Were Real. Another one is Bigfoot Beyond the Footprints. Third one is Underground Bases Hidden in North Carolina Mountains. What am I doing now? Oh, the most recent one is Spy in the Sky. Um, which is about the secrets and cover-ups on Mars, on the moon, on our planet, out in deep space.
I,
Um,
wow,
that one,
that's really interesting.
that one just came out this. Now it's last year,
Right.
but it's like an adult picture book. I had taken Google Earth images of like UFOs on sitting on Mars,
Wow.
or human habitats or some kind of habitats built on Mars. I've got pictures of these things taken with Google Earth, and in every picture, I give the coordinates so anybody can use Google Earth Plus and go find them for themselves, because there's so many people doing Photoshop
Hmm.
creations, and people need to see that indeed these things are for real.
I'd love to hear more about that. That's pretty awesome. That really intrigues me because I mean, everything about space. You see so many like TikTok videos or YouTube videos or just little shorts of you see, especially like the moon. They show little like crafts on the moon and they'll fly up and they'll beam out and I mean it's just crazy. Just from a basic telescope, they can see this on the just on the moon alone. So that's
Um,
pretty wild.
when I started exploring the moon, I did not expect to really find anything, because um, NASA's been airbrushing out the things that they have found on the backside of the moon literally for decades. So I figured the chances of me finding something were about zip. Bingo! I did find a white pyramid on the side of the moon facing Earth, and
Wow.
it's white, and everybody can envision a football field, and each side is longer than a football field, actually 28 feet longer than a football field,
Damn.
and that's that's right there on our side of the moon, which just shocked me to death.
And that's on which side of the moon? Is that the dark side or the
Oh
regular?
no, that's on the side facing Earth,
Of
which
the
means
one.
somebody with a really good telescope can find it themselves. But
Wow.
I have the coordinates, and so you can know how to find it.
That's pretty amazing. I'd love to. I'll have to get my hands on that book, so I'm definitely gonna go get me a copy of it.
I feel really strongly about that book. There are so many secrets, and I'll give you a taste of another one. Um, Antarctica, the ice is
Hmm.
melting really, really fast.
Hmm.
And in September of 2021, somebody somebody I know found the remnants of an ancient city emerging from the melting ice. We're talking about the walled structures that are rectangular shaped,
Yeah.
and the city spreads out like it would along a river or around hills. And after she found that one, between the two of us, we found five ancient cities emerging from Antarctica's ice. The reason this is exciting is because most scientists say that that continent has been covered with ice for 34 million years. That means these are the oldest structures on the Earth. And to
Oh
give you comparison, everybody thinks the Great Pyramid is old. It's not even 5,000 years old. 5,000 years is nothing compared to 34 million. So when we found that, it was really,
you know, Antarctica is a whole beast itself. I mean, I know Linda Moulton Howe does so many contemporary documentaries about that one with the pyramid and the two government agents or whatever they were, people that were inside that facility underground in Antarctica, and they pushed on these huge walls, and they would just open up on their own, and they seen all kinds of like almost like an underground facility, and that they were just telling her all the description of it. It was mind blowing. I mean, stuff like that really intrigues me, especially because it's
she's proven
Antarctica.
herself to be a very um, trusted researcher. And for that reason, she's been able to get some wonderful interviews with people that many people would never be able to get them
Hmm.
talking about.
Well, they
So
have to black their faces out and give like dummy names because people like that, they're high ranking officials or agent people. They don't want to lose, I guess, lose their life or lose their you know their retirement.
at the very least, they're worried about losing their benefits, and it does happen. I got to meet and interview a man who was an astronaut, and he talked too much about what he saw, and he lost all his benefits. So his personal feeling was that there's so much that the public has a right to know. And he's the one who blew the whistle on two astronauts meeting with a tall ET in the open bay of um, the cargo bay for the space shuttle.
It opened the cargo bay.
Yeah, they met, and the ET's craft was like hovering or parked right at the end of it. And there was another time when that's a similar or the same ET, about I think 8 feet tall, was in the living quarters of the International Station, and uh, he had to hunker down because they make those facilities for people who are no more than 6 feet tall.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
But he talked about that, so that's how he lost his job.
That's gotta suck when you're just trying to break, talk about truth, and you pretty much you're not getting silence, but you're losing everything, your benefits and all that.
Right.
Waiting for my uncle to retire from his commercial pilot. Yeah, I bet he's seen a lot. Love, especially commercial pilot. That's pretty wild.
And an
Um,
astronaut, yes. Uh huh.
what else was I going to talk about with UFOs? I know that they're Linda Moulton Howe was. Have you heard anything about like in your area? Like I know recently in Colorado, there's been like animal mutilations. Have you heard of anything like that out in the west side of North Carolina? Like
Well,
any kind of
that's how
animal?
Linda Moulton Howe got started, was investigating
Oh yeah.
cattle populations. For the most part, that seems to be out west on big cattle ranches. I've heard of one story, um, which she contacted me about because she wanted to check it out further. I don't know what happened with it, but it was a couple, and they reported, cattle mutilation here in near the Georgia border.
Hmm.
But that's not common. That's not commonly heard at all in this area,
No. There's
which
a
is
lot of
okay with me.
farms. There's a lot of farms out here. I know that for sure, especially like I mean in the Piedmont. Then you got like the north side, and then you got like Jefferson area where there's a lot of cattle farms. So I wouldn't put it past it if it does happen. It probably doesn't get talked about, or it's probably covered up for sure.
Right. And anyhow, let me go back to Antarctica one more time. This will tie that together with your interest in underground facilities. Um, Quite some time ago, I posted images I found with Google Earth of entrances into Antarctica.
Mhm.
And the largest one was, in round figures, maybe 300 feet across and 100 feet high. And within a day of posting it on the website, uh, it was like somebody poured India ink all over it. You could no longer see it. And they began
Wow.
to get rid of that in steps. That was the first thing that happened.
Mhm.
Then I backed off and looked at it where I could see two of the entrances. And very briefly, it didn't last long, but I got a picture. One of them was labeled Hollow Earth Entrance 1, and this other one was Hollow Earth Entrance 2. Then
Mhm.
that disappeared, and eventually the whole thing turned into a field of ice. You would never know that the entrance was
Oh
there.
wow.
I figured that that's a very active entrance if they're trying to cover it up like that.
If they covered it up that fast, yeah, and I've seen like little glimpses. I don't know if they were CGI, but I've seen like across the internet where they show like, yeah, this is hollow Earth in Antarctica, and it shows like huge, just a round circular thing cut into a side of a mountain, and it'll be perfect for like a fleet of starships, UFOs to go through in and out, undetected. So I'm wondering if that's what they use them for, you know.
Well, according to von Braun from World War II, he said that a Shangri-La was built in Antarctica for Hitler, and also talked about UFOs being built down there. And so I think we have multiple things going on. I think we have the humanity as we know it now. There's strong indications there's ET activity down there, um, and whatever the Nazis were or are
Mhm.
doing.
Well, plus Admiral Byrd, he was there, and he was. I mean, I don't know if it was altered or not, but his account diary that they talk about in a lot of the documentaries said he was his plane was not zapped, but it was kind of put into a stasis, and it was kind of magnetized and flown when he couldn't fly. He was flown to a certain area that was in a spot where he's never seen before, past like any part of the earth he even knew about, and he met with these alien like Nordic beings, and they were telling him that this and that about the weapons that we are using are bad for humanity, and we have to stop, and in order to prosper. And he went and told the officials and probably whoever he could talk to in the government, and they pretty much told him don't talk about it again.
He had two diaries,
Yeah.
and that story is in his secret diary, which he
Hmm.
wasn't even sure he would ever be able to share with anyone, but he kept it. And it reads like science fiction
Hmm.
because the controls of his plane were taken over. He was flown
Yeah.
into the interior of the earth, and he got to meet with the master, who was known as the
Hmm.
master of that world down there. And they look from what I understand, they look Nordic, but they certainly look like a good version of humanity.
Right.
So
Have you heard anything about reptilians?
I don't like reptilians.
Yeah. I don't that whole just everything I hear about them just kind of gives me the skis, because they're just, from what I hear, they're very evil. They look at us as pretty much as a meal, so we're pretty
Right,
much food to them. And
right.
they're have a lot of pretty much they're concealed very well, where you could be talking to one and like not even know it in real life. It's kind of like the movie They Live. They kind of use that as kind of like a precursor to give details, kind of like thrown. I guess that director was kind of throwing things in people's faces, like at the authorities, saying this is what's going on, but you got to really look at it this way.
According to Bill Tompkins,
Hmm.
he worked at NASA. He worked with at the highest level. He worked with von Braun um, and the guy who was right beneath him. And he was a little genius, by the way. But
Oh
anyhow,
yeah, I've heard of him, Bill Tompkin. Yeah.
he talked about how there were nice looking, human looking female ETs that worked like as secretaries at NASA, but they were the ones that were providing the engineers with information, and that's why we as a country were able to so quickly develop our space program. So that was the good aspect of it. But he also talked about the reptilians who claims to have seen transform, that they could look human and be in meetings and look like humans. And then he happened to like catch one in a hallway as it went back to its original form. Um, he was at the highest level, so you can't just blow it off as, you know,
No.
that can't be true. It
No.
might be true, or who knows. Um,
When someone that high and ranking that high is talking about it, you got to really take it for what it is, not with a grain of salt. Well, that's just like what they talk about with the government, with the what was his name? Valiant Thor. He was said to be alien species, and he was working with the government for so many years, and he was actually employed by the government in Congress and whatnot, or the Pentagon.
I've done a little research on that. I don't know if that story is true or not.
Right.
There's reason to be suspicious of it, but it could be true.
Wow. Well, I could probably talk to you for 3 hours about it. Stuff I could go on forever. They definitely going to have you. I'd like to have you come back on in the future if you're okay with it. We can kind of just go further down the rabbit hole, because I mean, all this intrigues me 100%.
There's a lot going on. There's certain
Oh, definitely,
plenty of mysteries for us to discover. So,
definitely.
anyhow, it's been real nice talking to you, and thank
It's
you
been
for
great.
having me on.
It's been great having you on, and I'll contact you in the future for do a part two, probably in like 3 months, probably around springtime. That's
Okay.
okay.
All
And
righty.
maybe we could go up over one of your books. That once I get one of your books, I can get some information and kind of do the next one on one of your books. So that would be
Okay.
great.
Try Spy on the Sky. I think that because you've already done a lot of research on the other subjects, I know this will be new to you. So give that one a try.
So what is it? What's your website again? Cashiers.
It's skyshipsovercashiers.com.
Okay.
Cashiers is like a cashier.
Right. So skyshipsovercashiers.com.
That's because
Awesome.
we began to see UFOs over this mountaintop town called Cashiers.
Awesome.
We didn't know the website was going to develop like it did.
Well, it did. Everything happens for a reason, and that's just the way it is, right?
That's it. So all the best with your research.
Well, thank you very much. You have a wonderful night, and happy New Year to you and everybody in the chat. Thanks for coming in. You'll have a great night. Take care. Okay. Good night, everybody.